Hello, this is Matt Kennedy, and this is Pop Sequentialism. And I felt, in light of what's been happening in the conversations I'm seeing in the collectible space, that it might be good to talk about estate planning. Um, a lot of people who are collectors are of a certain age, have families, have live not alone but with other people, and therefore may not be necessarily thinking about what will happen to their stuff when they are no longer with us. But unless you've left copious notes and a lot of documentation about the value and leaving behind notes that will make your collection easily identifiable, it can be very burdensome on your survivors when they become the inheritors of your collection. And as someone who doesn't have someone else living in my space at this time, it's become apparent, the problems of mortality. That while I have amazing things and I've got great friends and I have people that I see on a very consistent basis, I realized once about a year ago, honestly, I fell walking down the stairs. And it didn't hurt me. I wasn't injured, but it was kind of a miracle that I landed in such a way that I didn't get hurt. And it made me think, holy cow, I could have totally died on my stairs. And how long would it be before somebody was aware that I was gone, that I was no longer around? And unless you have a consistent schedule of activity and friends or coworkers, a lot of us, I started working remotely long before the pandemic hit, and a lot of people started working remotely afterwards. So many collectors are actively engaging with coworkers on a regular basis who may not be in their immediate area. They may not even live in the same city or state or country as the home office that writes their checks. And that being the case, it's number one, I think, important for anybody, whether you're a collector or not, to make sure that you have regular contact with people who know that you're okay, that will be able to notice a proper amount of time where you have not been in contact and see that as an emergency situation. So for those of you who are not living in a household full of other people, it's important that you take steps to make sure that it will be apparent to somebody when you are not around. And even for people who have spouses or children, or spouses and children, or in laws and parents, and whatever the denomination may be of the people with whom you spend most of your time, or live with, or interact with on a daily basis, it is important that you leave behind a complete account and index list of everything that you have. And I say this for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that if for whatever reason you find yourself in a situation, or I guess in this scenario, you are in a situation and you are found by first responders or neighbors or something to that effect, that if you don't have an active list of what was in your collection and photographs and great documentation of your collection, it could disappear. It has happened in the past where when there's an emergency, a home is left not necessarily safely enclosed, sometimes for access for further investigation. So, if there is a situation of mysterious circumstance, or if you are harmed by a third party, it is very possible that your local law enforcement may seal the area with yellow tape, but not necessarily lock all of the portals of entry to your home, which would make it a target for thieves. And if there's a situation whereby yellow tape is outlining your home, then it's probably a news item, and it may not be difficult for a bad actor to realize where your home is in order to gain access to it, in order to remove things of value from it. Now, a very important factor in all of this is having a will and testament, some type of legal document on file with a local governing body or an attorney or a trust, in some cases a bank or even a credit union, that outlines who's going to get your stuff when you're gone. And these are easy documents to change. You can write a document and you can put up just even a proxy person. You put your own name on it. It's not going to do anybody any good. So it's not really going to do you any good. But as a proxy of setting something up, if you haven't decided on who's going to get your stuff when you're gone, you can at least just put together a document and then alter it later. It's a very good idea to have somebody in mind and to make sure that they know where to look for your documentation in lieu of a lawyer stepping forward, a representative of the state, law enforcement, anything like that. And an easy way to do that is to let them know that you want them to be the executor of your estate, and then just have a postcard with that says, "In case of emergency, call or contact," and then that person's name, their telephone number, their email, their address, everything, every possible point of contact, and just put that on your refrigerator. And just make sure that your refrigerator isn't just covered in so much stuff that it's not easy to find. So if that's like a primary easy thing to find, then it will be found and they will be contacted. And then that person will be able to immediately get into contact with whoever has discovered you. Now, that's a worst case scenario, that you would, be alone and be discovered later. And so, again, I think it's really important that you make sure that if you are working and living remotely, that you have appointments more often than not with people on a regular basis, so that if you miss an appointment, you are missed and an investigation opens. And it's super easy to do. Granted, I hope everybody has at least one person in their lives. If it's not somebody that's super close to you, at least somebody else who you respect, that you would want your collection to wind up in the hands of in the event of your unfortunate loss. So it's good to think of those things sooner than later. We all have an idea that we're gonna live forever or live to a great old age, well beyond the point where we probably will. And I don't want to be morbid, but there are so many things that can prevent that from happening, from car accidents and other things. I mean, it's probable that you will not stop breathing at home. You may be at a restaurant, you may be at the gym, you may be in a car, you may be in a plane, you may be walking in a park, you may be anywhere. And So I also encourage everyone to carry identification, and in their wallet on the back of your license have "in case of emergency contact" taped to the back of your driver's license, to make it as easy as possible for, as I say, first responders or anybody else to contact somebody to let them know that tragedy has befallen you. And I guarantee, it's almost 100% guaranteed that nobody I'm talking to has done this. Nobody has this. If not on actually in the back of your license, which I guess would maybe be a bit superfluous, you can at least have it in back of your license on a card that, hopefully a laminated card. If you're like me, you may have a ton of stuff in your wallet, may make it hard to find. Anybody's going to find you that isn't going to steal your wallet is going to look through and see who they can contact to find out, to make sure that you aren't missed, and to notify someone. I think that most people are very compassionate, want to do that. And in lieu of that, they will contact law enforcement, who will then go through your personal effects and try and find somebody to contact to let them know what has happened. Now, as I say, it's not like we're not bond collectors necessarily. And I don't mean James Bond. I mean, like investment bonds or stock collectors. Those things are a little bit easier to track. Again, even if that's what your jam is, even if that's what you're collecting, if that's what you're buying, if that's what you're investing in, you want to make it as easy as possible for your dependents to find the logins to the accounts that hold your personal earnings. If you have crypto accounts, you need to have that printed out in some manner so that somebody can find it, or that is literally up in smoke. I mean, that is gone. That is not literally up in smoke, but figuratively up in smoke and literally gone. That they will not have access to it if they don't have the logins to your accounts. With things like crypto, not having the keywords, sometimes missing the keyword input more than 5 times makes it impossible to access the account at all. And that can be a tremendous waste of value and money, especially if you've been investing in things for your dependents. And you want to make sure they're taken care of. And again, I understand this is a conversation that nobody wants to have. And I think it's important to address these uncomfortable aspects of life in general as collectors, because I think all of us, at least in some manner, have it within our heads that we're collecting for posterity. We're collecting for an ongoing appreciation of the things that we collect. Many of us want these things to stay together. That's very unlikely to happen. But a lot of us do collect because we're putting together an assembly of objects that together, as part of this collection, have context unto themselves beyond their individual value, beyond their individual worth, and even their individual appreciation. Sometimes, by virtue of being in a collection, things become more valuable. We just saw that yesterday with the sale of an Action Comics #1. I believe it was an 8.5. It was a pedigree collection. And collections can have pedigree if the items within that collection are all of a standard, or of an eye, or of a person who has a degree of importance or recognized authority within the collecting community. So that Action Comics #1 sold for something like $6 million, which is the record for any copy of Action #1 being sold. And I think it having a gold label, a pedigree label, got it to that price, not just because it was a high condition Action Comics #1. Now, if you have comics that are slabbed, that's a super easy thing for someone to look up and find value about. That's one of the reasons why those of us who collect graded comics do so. If you have an ungraded collection, it would be good for you to maintain and check back in on values, but maintain an Excel spreadsheet of what you have, the relative condition. I know we're not all graders, we're not all professionals, but if you're collecting this hobby, you owe it to yourself to have investigated in a little bit of knowledge about grading and condition and understanding these things. Do yourself a favor and sticker them on the back if you don't want to upset the presentation of the individual book, what it is. And again, with modern collectibles, not all modern collectibles even have the title or the issue number on it. When you've got virgin variants and things like that, it's good to have that information on the back somewhere, accessible to someone who is not you, who is not an expert, so that if this is left to them, they can at least have an understanding or the means by which to understand the value of the collectibles that you've left behind. Now, whether it's a painting or whether it's, a huge collection of books or toys or art pieces, whatever it is, it's good to have, if not some immediate indication on the back or bottom of what it is to let people know what it is. A good idea to have a list with images that make it easy for your dependents to match up what you've been collecting with what it is, and then leave a ostensible value, a general value to it, and maybe with the date of the last time you assessed the value. Now, we all know values can fluctuate, they can go up and down, and with comic books, especially so. But it's important to leave some kind of record to make things easy to identify. I have met collectors of original comic book art who, rather than framing and hanging the actual original comic book art, make proxy photocopies and stick them in frames and put them on the wall. And I have a huge problem with that. I have a huge problem with that for many reasons, not the least of which is that when you're gone and your wife or your kid or your mom or your dad or your cousin or your neighbor or your roommate or your girlfriend or boyfriend or the executor of the estate for the cat or dog that you leave everything to is going to think that that's the original. And that may go to auction as an original, and it's going to cause tremendous problems within the hobby itself. And it may hurt the sale of legitimate things for your dependents if they are accused of selling fraudulent items. I also understand that people don't want to hang things because they're afraid they're going to age poorly. Well, just buy the good glass, buy the UV protected glass or plexi or whatever. Make sure it's not in direct sunlight. Do all the prep that you would do. Treat every piece of art that you hang on your walls as though it's the Mona Lisa. And whether it's worth 40 bucks or 4 million or $4 billion, it's best to keep those things in the best condition possible and to preserve them. And I don't understand why anybody would hang something in a way that was, especially work of art, in a manner that would cause it to be worth less money, that would be damaging it. This is a big controversy among people who collect animation cells. You can absolutely frame and hang animation cells. You just have to be very careful about the condition in which you do so. You have to make sure that there's some air to breathe between the cell and the background, that they're not just flat upon each other. So you want to have them insulated, almost, staccato like this within the frame. Leave a little window open in the back so it's not completely sealed. Make sure it's not in direct sunlight. Make sure that the temperature of the space that is in is conducive to the temperature required to keep that item in good condition. And animation cells are the hardest thing to keep in good condition of most collectibles. So not, a lot of people don't frame them. A lot of people leave them in books. That's not necessarily better either. If you're not taking them out and airing them out, they're going to get vinegar syndrome that way. Vinegar syndrome is a condition by which the cell starts to smell very much like vinegar. The colors start to fade. It degrades the actual acetate that the the painting is on top of the animation cell, and that will damage it. It will warp it. It will bubble it. It's a terrible thing. I've seen many collections go sour that way. Heat is a terrible, terrible impact upon collectibles and comic books. You want to make sure that you're keeping your collection at the right temperature so that they're not aging inordinately. You want to keep them in a very moist environment. You don't want to keep them in too dry of an environment. You want to find that good, just right temperature. Google it. I'm not going to cover those numbers here. That's not what this is kind of about. But if you don't have a list, if you don't have an index, your dependents are going to get ripped off. If they don't know what a piece is, then they can't offer it out to someone who knows what it is and they know what it is. They can't look it up online and kind of figure out like how much did the last, Sid Mead published painting go for? How much does a Poole and Marianella original Barbie figure go for? What's the value on a first printing of this omnibus or that omnibus or a collectible book, what have you? So put that information. If it's a painting, put a card with the artist's name, the name of the work, the year it was done, where you acquired it from. It's helpful if you put how much you paid for and then the date, and just put that on a card and just, tape that to the back of the piece. That's not going to degrade the value of the artwork. And it makes it much easier to sort when you're not around. And there are many easy ways to do estate planning. You can contact a lawyer. You can just go online and type in, free estate planning, something like that. And I'm sure a ton of options will pop up at different intervals. And the amount of work you have to do will be higher on something that costs less than something that you pay more for, where a team of lawyers will come in and do a lot of research for you and produce, provenanced statements about the values of things. So you can get an estimate on something. So, like if you have a Sean Stepanoff painting like this one behind me, you're probably going to contact the gallery that you purchased it from, and they will give you an assessment of the value of that piece. Maybe they charge you for it. A lot of galleries do. If you bought it secondhand, they're probably absolutely are going to charge you because they didn't benefit from the value of that sale. In any event, if you have that information, have a copy that you have in a fireproof safe that the combination to which is provided to a lawyer or the executor of your estate, so that you have all that stuff protected. And then have a copy of that also on the back of the piece. Just tape it to the back of the frame so that it's easy to identify. I've handled many estates from people who had passed away, for their spouses, for their children, and sometimes for auction houses where they don't know what the work is, but they have some indication, some paperwork that it came from a specific gallery. Well, galleries open and close all the time. So it can be very difficult to get a hold of the actual gallery. And in some cases, the principals of the gallery director's information is completely absent. So I ran La Luz de Jesus Gallery in Los Angeles for about 10 years, from 2009-ish to 2017, 18. And prior to that, I had worked there on Melrose when they were on Melrose, just in the gallery, not as a gallery director, but as a gallery manager and assistant manager for a number of years. My name probably no longer appears on any of the materials connected to La Luz de Jesus, except for the La Luz de Jesus 25 book that I participated in the publication of while I was the gallery director. So if someone had known that I had sold the piece They may look for it in the context of the gallery they purchased it from, or they may look for me where I am now. If they don't know who sold them the piece and the gallery is closed, it's going to be impossible for them to find out the record of what it actually sold for, because most galleries don't post prices on the websites. Now with comics, it's crazy because comic values fluctuate frequently and consistently. So what you paid for Action Comics #1 yesterday versus 5 years ago versus 2 years before that, etc., can be up, can be down. It can change, and it can change drastically. Now, Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman, is probably a bad example, but say something like Ultimate Fallout #4, the first appearance of Miles Morales. The Spider-Man of the Spider-Verse movies by Sony, the animated films. That comic book has had a really complicated history of pricing, where it's gone kind of up and down and over and, in every direction. It's gone really like vital signs on auto accident patient. So where you bought in the market may not really reflect the value, but at least it gives an indication, which helps track it to an authentic purchase and price. And that helps to alleviate the potential for it to be seen as an ingenuine object. Now, again, with objects for which there are more than one, it's less of a concern. For unique objects, it is very much front of thought for an auction house or even an estate sale company. And that's probably what's going to happen when you're gone, is that whoever your next of kin or next in line is, if you don't have a will, then it's going to get picked apart. There's going to be, if you owe money to if it's taken a month for someone to realize you're gone, you don't have automatic payments. If you don't have, you're missing work, your work can't get a hold of you. Maybe you get fired because of that. Doesn't matter. You're already gone. But it can be very, very difficult to figure out what bills have to get paid by your descendants and what doesn't. So that's going to be a fight. And then it's going to be, okay, so who gets this and that? Was anything taken from the property? But whoever winds up with it, if they don't want to deal with this stuff, if they're not like actual fans themselves, they're just going to contact some estate sale place, and they're going to come into your house and they're going to sell your knives and your pots and pans and your refrigerator and your laptop and your Wacom pad and your wine collection and your whiskey collection and your chairs and everything. And none of it is more important to them than anything else, outside of how easy they think they can sell it and the highest value they can get. And if you make it difficult for them to figure out what they've got, it's just going to appear on a website, maybe not even in a website, but in a sale at your house with a sticker on it. And it could be something that you paid $15,000 for. It could be, a European comic artist's work, be it a Fumetti illustrator or a bande dessinée French artist. If they can't figure out who it is or what it is, and it's not superhero, it's not something easy to identify, they may put $20 on that. Now, you may argue, what do you care? You're gone. But if the idea was to leave something behind for your dependents, your family, to profit from or appreciate, we can't make anybody appreciate anything they don't want. You could have a Ferrari and leave it to your kid. Your kid doesn't drive. Going to sell it. He's going to buy a bus pass and a trip to Europe and, mounds of cocaine. But the fact of the matter is that you don't get to choose really what happens to your stuff unless you make painstaking plans, file those plans through the proper channels, and make it airtight, because you can leave stuff to a museum and they may sell it. People don't realize this. I've gotten many pieces into museum collections as a curator, and I've been lucky. I haven't seen any of them sold. They've become part of the permanent collections or the exhibition collections of certain museums, the property of, and it helps give them an evaluation. And in many cases, sometimes the artists weren't particularly well known, became well known. In other cases, they're very well known artists. But when that museum gets into some kind of financial trouble, they're going to sell stuff. And the stuff that was donated in your name may go out the door. So that means no placard with your name under the piece. So your legacy ends when they sell that piece. People don't realize this. You get the tax-free write-off, I guess, in your taxes or your dependents' taxes, and even that has a limit. You can only write off art donations for a certain amount of time or for a limited amount over an extended area. Talk to a tax attorney. I am not a tax attorney. I'm not giving you tax advice. But what I do want everybody to avoid is a situation where they've spent their lifetime accumulating things and it winds up in the trash, because that can happen too. Depending upon where you live, depending upon if it's an HOA situation, you could live in an area where you're at threat of being eminent domained, meaning that the government wants to build a freeway through your living room, or whatever other purpose, build a stadium that goes to a private owner, even though the state took the land away. These are all eminently possible. And in that case, they may not be that interested in it. And if you haven't left behind any dependents, you haven't left behind a will, a testament, then you have no control over what's going to happen to that. And I hope this has put a certain amount of fear into you that you start working on this immediately. Now, comic book collections are tough, right? Because at least with the comic book collection, someone can look at the comic and look it up. And if they don't know condition, maybe you didn't know condition, and condition changes, as we know. We see a lot of 9.9s being given to books from the Bronze Age that would have missed a 9.4 submission 2 years ago at CGC, that it's hard to assess, truly hard to assess, but at least they know what the object is. Paintings don't usually have the titles written on the front of them. Frequently, they aren't even signed. So it's really, really important to document that stuff, to make sure that the documentation is attached in somehow or very, very close to these pieces. If you're a comic art collector and you've got one of these, books that have the pages that you slip them in and you can kind of page through it, make sure on the back of each page you have a card, with some acid-free tape taped to the back of it that tells everybody what that is. The artist. So if in a comic book page, there's many criteria, right? So you've got the penciler, the inker, the writer. Make sure the comic book, the issue number, and the page number, if possible, are all on that same piece of documentation on the back of that comic art page for every single comic book page you have in every single art binder that you have. If you have architectural drawers, make sure and you've got them stacked, you don't have them in different pages. Affix that stuff with acid-free tape to the back of each and individual page. If you have an estimate of the value, put the estimate of the value in there. Granted, that's going to change over time. It's probably going to have a lower value on it at the time you pass on to the point that it is sold. And certainly you're not updating it every day. That's nuts. I'm not advocating anybody to do that. But once a year, go through, look at stuff. I do with my wine collection. I reassess the value of the bottles in my wine collection and I update their price so that I know if I'm going to a party, I don't accidentally grab a bottle that maybe I only paid $30 for, that all of a sudden has been appreciated as a masterpiece wine and is now worth $800, and just bring it to a party where people aren't going to appreciate it. The same thing is true for any of your collectibles. Now, we collect a lot of stuff, right? Like we collect Cards, that's a lot harder to constantly maintain pricing on each individual sleeve. So don't do that. Put together an index, a list of what you have, and keep that with the collection so that that can be, scanned, turned into a PDF. That PDF, the text can be extracted as text, can be sent off to somebody who can price that stuff out, or at least tell you, hey, let's assume these are all in a meeting condition. And you can take pictures, you can send them photographs of what everything looks to be in. Most people who collect cards that aren't in clamshell graded cases, like hard slabs, are going to be in pretty good condition or are of a consistent condition across the collection. It's a bit unusual for someone to have a collection that runs from good to near mint in the same year of cards. It can happen. It's just a little bit less common. It is important, though, to make sure you document that, to keep a list. Honestly, I encourage all collectors to do this. If you're an art collector, when I buy a piece of art, it immediately goes into a spreadsheet I have of every piece I own. I have different categories for pieces that I mean to keep, pieces that I mean to hold on to for resale later, and pieces that I immediately want to sell. Since I have a website, since you can go to popsequentialism.com and buy art and comics and things like that, less slab comics than original artwork and other things, but I keep it small. It's curated. I don't want to just throw a bunch of stuff up. And I generally collect what I love, and I, as a gallerist of 20 to 30 years at this point, I have an eye that some people respect. And that means the stuff that I have is generally acknowledged to be good stuff. So you can check that out. You can see what I have stuff priced. Sometimes I have a price to sell right now. Sometimes I have a price put on it that I'm not paying attention to the market. I know it's going to hit this. In the stock game, you call it good till cancel, where you price it maybe ahead of where it's at right now, but it's going to go, and it's going to go above that. And I've never, ever lost money buying and selling art, ever. Comics, I think I've lost money once. But I mean, you could say that choosing not to sell is avoiding that possibility. You wait till the market comes back up and then you sell it. Some people get desperate. Some people get bored. Some people love the art of the deal and they just want to like buy and sell stuff. So, there's that aspect to it. I think as long as you're keeping some manner of record, it's helpful for everybody, but it's also helpful for you. As I say, I keep an index of what I buy so that I know never to sell it below that point. Wait until it gets to a certain point. I've never overpaid, I don't think, for any art. Certainly, why would you, right? Like, I don't think anybody wants to feel like they overpaid for something. You usually know that the next day if you have. I'm not emotional in my art purchases. I have artists whose work I've represented for years, whose work I don't necessarily own because I want the piece that I want. Some of them don't always do commissions. So I have to wait for them to do the piece that means a lot to me for me to ask them about, or wait until they decide to do commissions and then have a lot of conversations with them to make sure that I'm getting exactly what I want. In cases where I haven't had those conversations, it's possible to get disappointed. Again, I've never lost money because I've always worked with good artists. And I think my art direction has a certain value to it as well that makes it a good piece to the next, owner of that work that they appreciate. And it exists because in that case of a commission, because I made it exist, I contacted them and said, I want this and I want it to have this criteria, these things. You want to make sure you document what you paid for yourself, for your own records, and for your survivors when you're gone. And again, like I say, I don't mean this to be morbid. I didn't invent the rainy day, but I make sure I have an umbrella. Plan for anything possible, and you are prepared for the unimaginable, generally in life. So I don't want this to be a tremendously long video. Um, I wanted to make sure to, in light of the events of this week, some bad stuff, to have something a little, I don't know if this is necessarily more upbeat, but something else to think about as a result of thinking about that, that out of tragedy should come planning, should come a benefit. And I think the benefit that we should all come to, the silver lining of the rain cloud, is growth. You can't grow a plant without rain. So we had some bad news. We need to take a moment of introspection and look at ourselves and say, hey, how do we make sure that these collections, these valuable things, don't become garbage? And it's to make it super easy for anybody in your life that you want to benefit from your obsession of, as a collector. How do they benefit? How can it give them something if they don't inherit your appreciation for it? And again, we don't have that control. We don't have control over whether or not our kids are going to want the same stuff that we collected. Frequently, that's not the case. Occasionally, grandparents and grandchildren connect and have a kind of shared joy of a thing. And sometimes, certainly, parents and children do. But not everybody has kids. And not everybody has, nieces or nephews that appreciate the same things that they do, that they can pass this on to. But if you do, then make sure you put that in a will, because otherwise there's no guarantee that they get it. If you've been married and divorced and you have a fear or a bad relationship, and certainly not everybody does. I don't have a bad relationship, with almost any of my exes at all, one or two. But if you are concerned that you don't have a last will and testament, then that person may be the person who gets all your stuff. And if you don't want them to get that stuff, you want somebody else to get that stuff, make it easy for that other person to get your stuff. So put together a will, get in touch with a lawyer or some other representative, get your documents filed, and that it's a no-brainer, so that nobody has to worry about what's going to happen to your estate. Some estates get held in escrow for years, some for decades. Collectibles, it's probably not going to happen, but it could. I've personally testified, on paper in legal cases about information I had of the original owner of a piece and which child was supposed to get it and which former acquaintance or partner was supposed to get a piece. A lot of times that information isn't available. And so the wrong person can get it and the wrong institution can get it. So be sure that you are maintaining lists, and not just, paper lists, but it's good to have paper. You should absolutely have paper lists with your stuff, but also have something in the cloud, have something, ready to be sent out, have something in a safe, like a fireproof safe or a safety deposit box, instructions, but make sure that people have access to that. So frequently people will open up a safety deposit box and put stuff in it. They will perish. There's no indication that they had this secret account. Their estate gets settled. The safety deposit box payments expire because the credit card connected to this deceased person is no longer paying the bill. And it's kind of like what you see on Storage Wars, where you got bidders coming in to bid on the contents of a safety deposit box the same way that they would bid on a storage locker. And that's terrible. I mean, it's a terrible situation. So please, I implore you, plan. Make sure that you have the values of things written down and easily accessible. Have an email that someone can access with a link, even if it's password protected to some other account. Make sure you're up on your payments for these types of things. You know, if you're having a digital archive, that it's paid for, that it doesn't evaporate. If your things are archived on a website, if you own a website and you want your dependents to be able to continue maintain that website, make sure you have a document that has the access passwords and all that stuff to the website so that they can control it, so that they can get access to payments if it's selling stuff, so that they can ship things that are being sold. You know, this is a lot of stuff that people just don't think about until they have to think about it. So do yourselves a favor, list, document, save, print, safe, safety deposit box, lawyer, refrigerator, contact in case of emergency. All these things are very, very important. And if you have plans to donate to a museum or a society, make sure you work with a lawyer who can put together as ironclad an agreement as possible that they won't just take your stuff and then break up the collection and sell it. So you need that protection if that's why you're donating it. Otherwise, if you just want them to sell it to raise money for the institution, then good on you. You know, it's a charitable donation and your estate will get that tax benefit. But if you have actual plans, as did William Randolph Hearst when he gave his estate to the state of California, it was a pretty ironclad agreement. You know, they really can't do anything with that land. It's like a 100-page contract document. That's probably not going to be the case with your comic book collection or your baseball card collection or your Magic the Gathering or Pokemon collection, but it could be. So protect the collection, protect your inheritors by being diligent in the documentation of that collection and diligent in the legalese required to make sure that the person that you want to have your stuff gets it. And with that, I thank you for watching. I encourage you to follow the advice given. If you like this video, please give it a like, give it a subscribe. Visit the popsequentialism.com website. I would also encourage you to go to my art gallery website, which is gallery30south.com, where we do specifically curated shows for individual artists. There's an archive. There's past work that's available there as well. Amazing stuff. And I will be participating in the Comic Art Live exhibition or virtual comic show in May on comicartfans.com. I'll be sure to trailer that with a little bit of preview of what I'm going to be including. There's some pretty amazing stuff I don't think people thought I would ever sell. But as we get older, we get a little bit more conscious of what we can have and display. I want to see as much of the stuff as I own as possible. I'm no longer as excited about collecting stuff that goes into binders, that goes into architectural drawers. I want people to enjoy it, so I want to get more of that stuff out there. I will post more videos about that. Again, I say thank you, and I hope you all live forever, but none of us will, so let's plan for it. Thank you.